When you breathe in the sea breeze and contemplate the mysteries of the sea, a question might pop up in your mind. What's beyond this mystic beauty to serve modern-day human lives? Well, if you look closely, you will realize that humans have been blessed to use the seas for trade, especially since the inception of containerization. In this day and age, you can literally ship the entire world in the revolutionary 20-foot equivalent units, which came into being since 1956. Looking at the recent stats according to Clarkson's forecast, the global container cargo volume outlook is approximately 208.54 million TEUs for 2024. Also, Maritime Strategies International anticipates a growth rate of 4.5% for the same year. Intrigued to know how such huge numbers are generated in this industry? And just how radical is this 20-foot revolution in shipping trade worldwide? Let's enlighten ourselves, voyaging to the past and sailing our way back to the present day. Nearly 90% of the world's trade, worth a whopping $13 trillion, defines the capacity of the modern day's massive shipping industry. Nearly 2 billion tons of manufactured goods, raw materials, and produce are transported across high seas each year. So yes, the ocean is the hub for the majority of trade in the world. Let's hear what experts related to the shipping field have to say on this. There are approximately 100,000 ships in active service in the world. These things are huge, the size of 4 football pitches. More than 1 million seafarers operate these ships, including a massive number of merchant fleets. Whatever we consume, 90% of those are freighted by these maritime transporters, most significantly, container ships. You see, these sea giants like to carry the world in literal containers. But our question is, how exactly does that work out? Well, let's hear how experts express their insights regarding this trillion-dollar shipping industry. Starting with Dr. Tristan Smith, naval architect from University College London. He thinks of the shipping industry to be an indispensable part of economic growth in world trade. He also believes that the shipment of all types of goods were made possible due to their cheaper fare compared to other transportations. Goods produced in one part of the world can be easily transported to the other part of the world or continent without any barriers. To this, principal consultant of Drury Maritime Consultancy, Chantal McRobert, stated, "Everything from our daily necessity to what it needs to supply the entire country as a part of trade are regularly vesseled across the ocean. To top that off, it's not too feasible to transport necessities and goods on airplanes, because the number of cargo ships are higher than the cargo planes and often lead to affordable carrier charges. This will make the entire process of using airplanes as a mean of regular route of transportation impractical." Now hold on and think for a second. Suppose you're enjoying a creamy avocado spread on toast with ham and eggs. And mind it, avocados are not inexpensive, nor do they grow in a lot of places in bulk, at least not grow around the corner of your home. It's impossible to even imagine how difficult it would have been for an avocado grower in Kenya to sell their products if those were not carried by shipping containers. Another question: if you are a person fathoming obsession for sneakers or expensive shoes, can you guess how expensive your favorite pair of shoes would have been if they were transported through planes? Absolutely exorbitant. Because of shipping containers, the prices of such necessities get down within reach. These simple examples indicate how this very industry is a significant contributor in the creation of globalization. Sadly, we hardly pay any attention or try to be enlightened about it. Now, can you remotely imagine what will happen if the shipping business is taken off the list of the supply chain tomorrow? If something so unfortunate happened for real, half of the world would starve to death, and the other half would freeze. The specific industry, which is responsible for feeding, clothing, housing, and entertaining the majority of 7 billion people, can wreak havoc in a fraction of minutes. Isn't that alarming? It is indeed. You will also notice that raw materials are usually transported in bulk carriers and tankers. Then what do those huge steel boxes carry? Those are called container ships, which may look the same from afar, but they carry the most dependable manufactured goods and products of various sorts concealed from the outside world. Tracing back to shipping history, it has transformed into sail, steam, or even diesel. But nothing beats the introduction of this 20-foot steel container, which has garnered a groundswell of support from global trade. Chantal stated, all kinds of usable products from chairs, smartphones, perishable food items to car scraps can be transported through these container ships. The categories of these necessary goods are simply endless. But something so widely useful can have some serious downsides too, as in, what you presume to be inside the cargo boxes might not be present at all. Why? It's a hard pill to swallow, but you will be shocked to learn that the shipping business is also used to supply the black market with counterfeit and contraband goods. This black market trading amounts to $1.8 trillion per year. Like every giant industry in the world, this illegal business is racking up at a significant rate, because these containers are not opaque and hence cannot be seen through for further due diligence. Stick around, as we're warming up to shed more light on that going forward. Now, don't live under the rock and assume that container shipping is a newly developed concept. If you turn the pages of the glorious history, you will see that the Greeks, Romans, Portuguese, Spanish, and ancient Egyptians boasted of expertise in shipping way ahead of time. On this note, Dr. Helen Farr from Centre of Maritime Technology, University of Southampton, gave her elaborated insight on Egyptians. They always had a predilection for collecting ebony, ivory, frankincense, and myrrh, and notably stones to build their iconic pyramids and temples. Whenever we mention Egypt, we either think of the monumental pyramids, or we think of Pharaoh, the ancient Egyptian monarch. And Hatshepsut was a notable pharaoh in ancient Egypt of the 18th dynasty. She was in full power from about 1479 to 1458 BC, meaning the 15th century BC. And something fascinating about her is, her tomb had the perfect opulence embedded with reliefs that bears the evidence of the earliest shipping development. That's shocking, isn't it? You see, there were meticulously illustrated inscriptions inside that showed 3,000 men were dispatched from Egypt to Punt for the sake of trade. Inside her temple, 5 big ships also anchored off to the port of call to collect the relief items that were used for various purposes into the temple of Hatshepsut. It also indicated she brought an obelisk through the high seas in a large ship. It was about 30 meters high that could only be transported with nothing but the giant ship. It is evident that the use of ships favored the overall economy of Egypt and the Hatshepsut's dynasty, particularly the merchants' fleets at that time. But the use of sail was of yesteryear, way before Hatshepsut reigned. In fact, around 3100 BC, the current and wind flow of the River Nile helped transport heavy loads back and forth using wind in one direction and current in the other. Over time, this method was adapted by many, especially Egyptians. Their brilliantly thought-out sea trade method gradually paved the way to the modern-day shipping industry that we know of today. Let's take a sneak peek into a different period of the past again. Explorers went beyond rivers, shorelines, and dared to reach to the vast blue sea to master the business of sea trade. Naturally, both colonization and exploitation occurred after discovering new lands. For instance, can you recall the Polynesians, Columbus, and the Portuguese? Well, they subsequently conquered the Pacific, the Americas, and the exotic spice islands of Asia with their own motives and uninterrupted determination. You know, ships were never as friendly as they are today, all because ships have undergone a massive technological advancement in recent days. Today's navigation system that allows sailors to find the designated route easily were vastly hinged on watching star constellations to mark their position and navigate through the roaring sea. That means there was indeed a time when ship captains used to sail through the seas looking at the sun and stars for direction, even if land was not in sight. Gone are those days, owing to the Industrial Revolution. But the astonishing fact is that it still took the ship industry to adapt to such advancement even after the industrialization. However, even after the revolution, building ships was expensive and extremely time-consuming back then, like it still is. In the 20th century, the technology of ships started evolving rapidly, and after the Second World War, the progression was more evident. Let's hear what Neil Davidson, the senior analyst of Ports B Terminals from Drury Maritime Consultancy, and Richard Mead, managing editor of Lloyd's List, Maritime Intelligence, shared in this regard. In their analysis, they indicated that breakbulk vessels used to be the common carrier to load all the cargoes, unlike today. They used to be loosely fit to the tow of the ships to be fit inside the ship without requiring any container. This makes the process quite tedious and slow due to the constant movement of the cargoes on and off the ship. It involved the weeks of toil of stevedores and dock workers to finally give a green signal for the movement of the cargo, and it was also expensive too. So, What was the solution then? Simple: containerization. As it took an atrocious amount of freight cost and tons of weeks to clear a ship for the stevedores and dock workers, the concept of containerization came into being. This made port operations a lot smoother and played a vital role in globalization going further. And today, you can't even imagine globalization to exist without container shipping. Containerization was meant to smoothen and streamline the overall operation of the port. As much it has to do with how the goods are to be carried, the more it has to deal with how easy the port operation can be made. So let's get to know what the historian named Henning Morgan of the world's renowned shipping and logistics company named Maersk referred to. Talking about containerization in today's world, it doesn't necessarily mean the time when the Portuguese used coconut shells to stuff peppers and brought it from India 600 years back. To this generation, the containerization of which we understand today started in 1956. History sheds light on how it all started on a dock in New Jersey. A man called McLean, a skilled trucker, thought of using boxes to transport goods. His logic behind it was that he could lift up the box that is behind him on the truck. Without dismantling the crates inside the box can easily be lifted up from the dock and lifted down on the other side of the destination, straight right onto another truck upon emptying the ship. So his idea of ingenuity forged him to clinch the world's first ever delivery of the shipment of goods in makeshift containers in April 1956. This was a well-thought-out move to transport goods that no one ever thought of before him. Henning Morgan continued, there were 58 modified trailer chassis, which were 33 feet in length. He transported them from Port Newark, New Jersey to Houston, Texas on the vessel called SS Ideal X. Originally, this tanker vessel was used during the Second World War, and Malcolm utilized it for securing the containers. His innovative idea and execution contributed to reducing the shipping rate by 25%, which got immediate attention from competitors. A brilliant idea to stir up the industry indeed. Seeing no other option, the competitors started making containers with varying lengths, heights, and volumes for global reach. As global shipping was expanding with the invention of Malcolm's container, the US had a bigger plan with this, not just only to ship the regular amenities. The American Department of Defense needed to move materials from the US to bases far and wide when the Vietnam War was on. Pretty sure you can guess they were loads of guns, big weapons, and massive weaponry transports. They were foraging for a mode of carrier that could easily fit those materials and be handled with ease and flexibility. Instantly they gazed upon the container, but at the same time, they requested standardized containers that were easy to work with. And this is when McLean's idea worked out. As soon as McLean patented, he created the structurally robust piece of work with a perfect dimension. The International Standard Organization, ISO, approved its dimension for stackability, and that is exactly when the 20-foot equivalent unit, TEU in short, was proudly introduced. Thus began the 20-foot revolution with new possibilities. Due to being 20 foot in size, it became a benchmark for all sorts of shipment. It means you put your goods in a 20-feet box, load it to the truck in a 20-feet box, lift it up to a 20-feet box, and the port where the ship remains is also compatible to deal with such facilities. When these are put into a global scale of economies, the overall process becomes more efficient, faster, and cheaper for the global supply chain of shipping. From the manufacturing hub to ports, through customs, ships sail to several points throughout the process. To be particular, it was intermodalism, which meant you could move these boxes from one transport to another without going through hassle. However, containerization is not suitable for all kinds of goods. As different products have different volumes, the carriers need to match up to that. For reference, bulk carriers are used for raw materials, whereas tankers carry LPG gas and fuel. Also, ferries and cruise ships sail with people for the purpose of tours, travels, or other necessities. And yes, don't forget to count on specialized icebreakers and toads that are in action. Dr. Tristan stated, to talk about numbers, nearly 100,000 ships traverse on the seas, including small fishing vessels, rowing boats, and many more. All right, moving on. Here's another question for you. Do you know the t-shirt you're wearing at the moment was most likely made in Bangladesh or Vietnam? You definitely didn't pay attention to it until we asked you. But this is the industry many people in those countries work in to earn a livelihood. What about the healthy banana you had for a quick snack? It's highly likely that it was grown elsewhere and brought to the supermarket through shipping as well, and most precisely in a container. This proves shipping is not something we often think of. Speaking of that, are you familiar with a term called sea blindness? If not, it means we are mostly obscure to how and from where goods or fresh produce reach our hands conveniently. That also means it's the inability to appreciate the importance of seas, specifically relating to trade. You wonder, how can you not see it through when 90 to 95% of products travel by ships till this day? For the record, in current times, the global container fleet is in excess of 5,000 ships, with a total capacity of 21 million 20-foot equivalent units as per Chantel again. Next up, let's talk about one of the world's most well-known trading routes that was used by ancients for more than thousands of years, the Silk Road, linking China and Rome. On this, Professor Hans Hendrischke from the Chinese and Business Management Department of the University of Sydney Business School shared his knowledge. Surprisingly, China used the silk, a sought-after clothing fabric, as a currency for international dealings, and Rome eyed on it because the fabric made such top-quality clothing that couldn't be found elsewhere. That made silk an essential trade item to bring luxury products to China, even if it meant using challenging routes like the desert. You think the trade stopped at silk dealings? No. With the Silk Road, it became easier for trade routes to expand. Starting from products like vegetables, fruits, spices, grains, artwork, precious stones, to technologies, philosophies, religious ideas and languages, this connection transformed several aspects of society along the way. Professor Hans focused on how the Silk Road became a melting pot for cultures and influences to blend in. With time, China became an enlightened country with their bureaucratic structures. That's how, from the Middle Ages, maritime trade became a fundamental part of this Eurasian network. Professor Hans pointed through the map on this point. This route went around from the Indian Ocean, Gulf of Bengal, Arabian Sea, to Egypt and Europe from China for trading goods. For example, you will find silk and porcelain from Southeast Asia and onto the Arabian Peninsula, and it would be silk, Buddhist sutras, and weapon metals for Japan. When ships got modernized and people learned more about sailing, it got easier to travel between Arabia and China by sea. But when the Ottoman Empire stopped trading with Europe by land in 1453 CE, traders had to come up with new sea routes alternative to overroad. And there came a ray of new hope when the world-renowned explorer, Vasco da Gama, found the Cape of Good Hope around Africa in the late 15th century. This let European sailors get back to trading with places like Southeast Asia. Ports like Zanzibar, Goa, and Alexandria got more occupied with Portuguese, Dutch, and British ships trying to take charge. It sounds unfair, but the harsh reality proves that the ruler of trade was the one who possessed the ports. They enriched their power and wealth by accumulating tax from other merchants passing through. Luckily, the bright side of such maritime trade gave the developing nations the opportunity to grow. It also helped their citizens lessen their financial restraints and made them solvent. Getting back to China again. This vast nation has played a significant role in reforming the economy to broaden foreign trade, which became more ocean-going with time. The transformation took place after China was freed of Chairman Mao's cultural bindings. Again, Richard Mead pointed out that China's government considered the maritime trade to be crucial for their economy, which gave them an opportunity for global leadership in shipping containers. Driven by a capitalism held by utopian, sooner China is all set to become the capital hub for the global shipping container. Professor Hans also noted China's role in global economic expansion through the Belt and Road Initiative defines their own way of globalization. And when President Xi Jinping launched the One Belt, One Road Initiative in 2013, the global economic order was reformed. But what does the One Belt, One Road Initiative stand for? This was a clever policy of the Chinese government to invest in all sorts of transport mediums all across the Silk Route that connected Asia with Africa and Europe through land and maritime networks. It allows both the Chinese government and Chinese companies to buy all the possible ports and terminals in that route to solidify their economic stability. Neil further added that it involved investments in transport infrastructure along the ancient Silk Road route. This investment amounted to $1 trillion across 70 countries. Also, it revived the historic Silk Road as a modern trade network for China and its neighbors. Furthermore, in the development phase, there were pipelines, railways, power stations, and most importantly, ports to support a major increase in bulk and containerized shipping. The maritime Silk Road spanned from the Pacific Islands through Southeast Asia back to China, and another route went from China to the Indian Ocean, possibly circling Africa. Many believe it aimed to form a trade bloc with China while they were in lead. China's vast industrial capacity and Europe's interest in collaboration gave China a major advantage. With a growing population, China required new investments and economic activities. As a result, companies like China Merchants and Costco were investing in ports and terminals to link China to new markets. Now let's talk about how Singapore, a geopolitical rival of China, also became a part of this new strategy. Since Singapore controlled the Strait of Malacca, it became a center point for maritime trade routes between Europe, Africa, and Asia. Also, China was trying to establish a canal between Thailand and the Malay Peninsula. This move reduced the transit time and simplified channeling through Hambantota, the deep water port in Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka failed to service their interest-bearing loan, so China made a deal to trade debt for equity. This resulted in them currently owning the port with a 99-year lease on the line. As part of the One Belt, One Road initiative, China's state-owned shipping company, COSCO, invested in the port of Paros in Greece. They turned it into a major point for transshipment by improving its facilities and increasing container traffic. This investment catapulted Paros's importance in the Mediterranean. Additionally, China and Russia were eyeing an Arctic Silk Road due to melting sea ice, so they could create a new shipping route and access to resource-enriched frontier lands. Enough with the history. Let's take a small break and come back to the present day for a while. When the 20-foot units were all the buzz, there emerged a newly polished contender, the larger version of the former one with a new name, the FEU, meaning 40-foot equivalent unit. Yes, TEU's original measurement was introduced 60 years ago, but you see, containerized shipping has evolved since the SS Ideal X's first voyage, with the standard 20-foot box often replaced by 40-foot containers. These larger containers are preferred for shipping goods, even though measurements are still given in TEU. Surprisingly, old TEUs are now being repurposed into trendy commercial spaces worldwide. How would you like to see them in reality? Surprisingly enough, after the 2011 earthquake in New Zealand, these modified shipping containers were literally used to create a temporary shopping area in Christchurch. Now that is something highly innovative yet cleverly conceptual. This new approach attracted global attention and inspired architects to explore similar ideas almost immediately. Since then, containers have not been used just for only emergencies anymore. You might have noticed trendy cafes, homes, and offices resembling containers. Newsflash, those are indeed made from containers. While 40-foot containers may seem similar, they're actually highly standardized now. In addition to the usual, there are open-top containers for tall items or living beings like zoo animals, such as adult giraffes or elephants, flat racks for oversized cargo, and gated containers for other animals. And these specialized containers are usually loaded on the ship's top, according to Chantel. That's another step forward, must say. We have already talked about transporting food items in containers, but these journeys are long, and there's a chance of food getting rotten if not kept in suitable temperatures. So, do you wonder how perishable products that need refrigeration were containerized? Well, reefers, also known as refrigerated units, are used for shipping goods that require specific temperature control. They are cooled boxes in which a refrigerated unit is installed at the end of them. These units have special plugs to connect to container ships, making them ideal for almost anything to carry in it, such as cold chain logistic items. In the old days, bananas were shipped in specialized reefers at a cool 13 degrees Celsius. But standardized refrigerated containers have replaced this practice. Previously, entire ships were dedicated to banana trade, but now standardized reefers have made it possible not to dedicate the entire ship to do. And finding such a method of carrying the banana only on the whole ship is also very difficult these days. Like we mentioned earlier, an industry so giant can and will have drawbacks in hindsight. That's what Richard Mead also shed light on. Shipping containers hold diverse content regardless of their size or intended use. They can carry anything, legal or not, with less than 10% getting inspected. Each container has a barcode for tracking, but what's inside isn't always accurately declared. Sometimes items are misdeclared or substituted. Despite efforts to tighten regulations, illicit goods can still slip through undetected. As determining the extent of this issue is no easy feat, the threat remains potent. As wrong as it may sound, contraband and counterfeit shipments have been an illegal part of this industry. Now, don't be shocked to know that smuggling has a long history in shipping. The rum runners, who smuggled alcoholic beverages illegally, were some of the most infamous lawbreakers. But, in 1919, there was an introduction of alcohol prohibition law to term the intoxicating beverage as an illegal import in the US. During this prohibition, St. Pierre, a French-controlled island near Canada, became a prime hub for illegal alcohol trade, and one of the notable trade controllers was the notorious gangster of that time, Al Capone. As a wicked strategy, the rum runners stayed 3 miles off the coast to avoid the US Coast Guard, so they could operate beyond jurisdiction. They anchored along the run line from Florida to Maine and waited for alcohol buyers. It's not like no efforts were made to stop smuggling, yet vast amounts of alcohol moved through the seas incessantly. Even today, such smuggling remains a mention-worthy challenge for the shipping industry. To talk about the global wine export industry, it exceeds $220 billion annually, with French champagne leading the way. Norwegian aquavit matures at sea for 4 months and acquires an offbeat taste. Also, Australian wine is shipped in large bladders to reduce costs. How so? Peter Van Duyn, maritime logistics expert from Deakin University, cleared the confusion on this. Those balloon-like bladders could hold 30,000 litres of wine, which meant the traders got to save on the complicated packaging process. For selling purposes, these were bottled in England. It's no news, drug trafficking faces severe death penalties, even though the majority of countries accept alcohol trade. Despite the risk of being penalised, the ruthless drug networks operate in full swing, with shipping being their broad method. However, security is not taken lightly in this case. Secure ports not only protect ships, but also improve overall security. The IMO, aka International Maritime Organization, assists various countries in tightening port security through training and sharing the best of practices. Do you think that's enough to prevent these illegal dealings? Not a chance. While security measures help fight against illegal trafficking, dangerous cartels still thrive due to high profits. Despite the casting of this dark shadow, shipping has transformed lives, as well as providing jobs and bridging economic gaps worldwide. No wonder shipping continues to bolster global trade and prosperity, underpinning its cruciality in our modern world. No one in the history of mankind can deny shipping containers have revolutionized global trade. It connects distant countries of the world and boosts our economic growth on a broader scale. From the invention of the 20-foot equivalent unit, TEU, in 1956, to the present-day advancement of the shipping industry, these steel boxes have reformed the way we transport goods of all sorts. No matter how aggressively risky the challenges like smuggling and illegal trafficking are, the shipping industry works like a lifeline for billions of people worldwide.